Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you had a great week and I'm excited to share this project with you. Today we're going to make really cool pieces of Art Nouveau jewelry out of the scarabs that I showed you how to make a few weeks ago. If you saw that video, we used stone cabochons, and I will link the video down below if you missed it. And you can play catch up and watch that. And we carved our own scarabs, and today we're going to solder them and turn them into jewelry. So I'm using some copper foil tape, and I have a pair of scissors, and basically that's what we need to get started. Now what I'm going to do, and as I always do, is I'm going to list all of the materials and tools that I use down below. So if I don't say it in the video or talk about it in the video, you can just check down below. And I'm going to first measure a piece of copper foil tape around the perimeter of my cabochon or my scarab, and then that has a sticker backside to it, so one side of it is just the regular copper and then the back has an adhesive. So as I go around the stone and apply the tape, I'm going to be peeling away the paper backing, and you don't want to peel away the paper backing all at once or it's going to make it pretty difficult for you to foil. It's going to be more difficult to work with. So I try to just peel a little bit of that paper back at a time, and I'm going to center it and press it down, and that is basically foiling. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this around the perimeter of each of our stones, and I'll show you how I do one completely, and then I'll choose one to make the jewelry project with. You can see that I'm using my fid or my burnisher to go around and to smooth out all of the wrinkles in the copper foil tape. I'm going to be firm with it. I'm going to, give it some pressure to make sure that I don't have any creases in there, but you also want to be careful that you don't tear your foil. So I'll go around all the sides, the front, the bottom, the sides, and make sure that it is nice and shiny. You don't want to have any kind of a lumpy surface. You want to make sure that that foil is completely smooth, or as smooth as you can get it. Once I think it looks great, then I'm going to take my craft knife and I'm going to go around and I'm going to trim off any excess foil. It's very easy to do. You just want to be careful. The craft knives can be sharp. Once I'm finished with that step, I'll inspect all of my handiwork and make sure that it looks great. And then we're ready to move on to the next step. But I wanted to mention, if you didn't already know, my brand new jewelry making soldering book called Soldering Iron Jewelry is now available on Amazon, and I'll link that above and below, and if you haven't checked it out, be sure to do so. So getting back to our project, I have these guys all ready to go, and I have my soldering iron plugged in, turned on. It's nice and hot. I have some liquid flux and some lead-free solder, and I'm getting ready to solder. So I'm going to apply flux to all of the copper foil areas, and you want to use a disposable brush to do that, and you want to make sure that you get every spot because the solder will not stick without flux. I'll take my soldering iron and I'm going to pick up just a little bit of solder at a time, and I'm going to go over all of that fluxed copper foil, and the solder will flow nice and smooth. And if it's not flowing nice and smooth, you might need to turn your soldering iron up a little bit and make it a little bit hotter. And again, I talk about all that stuff in my new book. It is a complete course in soldering iron jewelry. So a lot of people ask me questions about, little things here and there, temperature and, why isn't this working and that working? And I pretty much cover all of that in that book. So We're going to go around all the edges, make sure you have a nice coating, make sure that none of the copper foil is showing through. So you want to make sure that you have silver solder covering every area of copper. And then I did the rest. I sped this up a little bit so you wouldn't have to sit through it all. And then I'm going to use some copper wire. And here I have my wire straightening pliers, and they're like nylon jaw pliers, and I'm just going to run those through my wire before I cut it from the spool to straighten it out, get any kinks off, and then I'm going to apply some flux to the end, and then I'm going to coat it with solder, which is known as tinning. Some people call that tinning. So I'm going to get it started, and I'm going to apply this to my stone. And using this copper wire, I'm going to create kind of a frame around my stone, and it's going to give it dimension, and it's going to just make it really cool. You'll see in a minute. I'm going to go around the edge. It's going to give it strength. And then I'm going to take that wire and we're going to create a design with that. And I just am in love with flowing Art Nouveau styles of artwork and of jewelry design. And that's what I'm going for with this project. So right now I'm going to continue wrapping that wire around my stone, around my scarab, and continuing to solder it, adding more flux, going around little by little. And it's hot, so you have to kind of take your time, and you want to make sure that you don't burn your fingers, because you don't want to be holding on to the end of that wire with your hand and then holding your soldering iron on the other end of the wire, because that heat's going to go up that wire pretty quickly. So always use something like an old pair of pliers to help you manage to hold your project, to flip your project. Things that are circular or like this, that have like a dome shape, they can be very hard to hold with a pair of pliers. So you can use a clothespin, that works. Ingenuity, right? You have to be creative, and you have to try to think like necessity is the mother of invention, is what they say. So you'll find a way if you have a problem to solve. Sometimes we're like, oh, well, let me try this, thing from my junk drawer in my kitchen. And you know what? A lot of times it works. So I'm going to continue going around and applying more flux and more solder until the stone is completely coated. Now, I didn't realize that I skipped a part of my filming until I was editing this video, but I cut another length of copper wire and did the exact same thing, and I soldered that copper wire in the crevice right between where this wire is soldered to the scarab, and I matched it up with the other wire, and I created some bends. So that's the part that, unfortunately, I'm sorry I missed filming it. I thought I had my camera on and I didn't. So what I basically just did is what I said. I added a second wire and I matched it with the other one, like held them together, and then used my fingers just to bend some curves in there. You can also use a pair of pliers to create those bends. And then I am applying flux and some drops of solder to the wires. And my whole point of doing this is I don't want the wires, like the pair of wires, right? I don't want them exactly together. I want to have a few millimeters of space in between the wires. And I'm going to use my bridging technique to fill that space with solder. If you want more instruction on this technique, I go into it in depth in my second book, which is entitled Soldered Alchemy. So I will also link that below if you're interested. And you want to kind of use capillary motion, if you know what that is, if you're a science buff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the flux on, I'm going to pick up kind of like a large drop of solder, and I'm going to have that solder land on both wires, but the wires aren't really touching. So we're going to do that all around the project. So we have like a spot here, and then a spot an inch or so away, and then a spot an inch or so away, and that's the part that I'm doing now. And there will be one or two areas where the wires touch, and that's just, how it is when I'm, the way the design turned out. But as you can see right there, when you add a drop and it's touching one wire and then goes to the next and there's space in between, you can use the tip of your soldering iron to grab that drop of solder while it's hot and molten hot, and you're going to pull it. And that is the motion that I was talking about a moment ago. That's that science where it's going to fill in the gap. But you need to have drops of solder here and there around the wires for that to happen. And once you get to the very top, I have these two little ends of wire. One's a little shorter than the other. I mean, I could snip them and make them the same length. And I figured, let's just turn this into a loop. Let's make a bail so we don't have to add one to our pendant. So I'm going to kind of attach those wires with solder there, just so you know that they're kind of really firmly together. And then I'm going to take those two wires on the top, and I'll use my soldering pliers, and I'm going to bend those into a loop. And again, I'm going to leave space in between those wires, which you'll see in a minute. And here I'm taking the drops, and you can see there's that capillary emulsion where it's pulling, and I'm going to use the tip of the soldering iron to pull that solder from one glob that I applied on the wires to the next. And you also want to make sure that you coat all the wire with solder, that you don't have any copper sticking out. You can also use pre-tinned wire, like silver-plated wire works great. You don't have to use copper. So there's another hint. I forgot to mention that earlier as well. So I'm just going around and I'm going to continue applying flux. I'm going to flip it over and make sure that I got all that wire on every side, the back, the sides, the front. And you want to make sure that your back of your pendant looks nice and neat as well. You always want to strive to get your back to look as good as the front. By this point, I think I'm finished filling in the wires, and we're going to work on the bail. So I'm going to use the shorter wire first and my soldering pliers, and you can see I'm just gripping it and turning it into a loop, and I'm going to touch the wire down to itself, or down to, where it ends, down at the wire beneath it, which is either that wire or, the companion wire, and then I'll bend the companion wire around it. And like I said earlier, if your wire is a little bit too long, you can always use your wire cutting pliers, your side cutters, and you can snip the end of that wire. So I'm going to apply more flux, and then I am going to solder it. The first thing I'll do is I'll apply a drop of solder to attach those wires right where they end. So we have a formed loop, and then I'm just going to go right around and fill it in as best as I can. And if you need to add more solder to do that, go ahead and do so. I'm going to inspect it, make sure that I got all that copper covered, and that's our bail. That's where we can add either a jump ring, or we can just put a chain right through that area. So the last thing I'm going to do with this part of the project is I'm going to inspect it and make sure that I have all the copper covered up, that it's soldered nice and smoothly, that I don't have any parts that need to be gone over again, and then I'm going to get ready to do some decorative soldering. And I'll just be picking up small pieces of solder with the tip of my soldering iron and applying them here and there. And, there's no rhyme or reason to where I'm going to place these dots of decorative solder. I'm just going to try to look at it and think, where does it need balance? And, look at the way this trails upward like a stream of smoke. It's such an Art Nouveau flowing kind of design, and where's the balance here? Does one side gonna need a little bit more than the other? And that's basically just what's kind of going through my head while I'm doing this. And I'm just gonna go over the drop. So I'm going to pick up a small amount, put it down, and then if I need to make it a little bit bigger, I'll pick up a little bit more solder and I'll apply more. And I apply a lot of flux, as you can see. You know, I'm constantly using it, and you know, there's different types of flux. You can get like a gel flux or a paste flux or a liquid flux, and I prefer the liquid flux. I mean, it's pretty much like personal choice of what kind you like. And when I'm working with things like wires like this, I find that I really like the liquid flux because it's liquid and it's going to flow in between all those wires. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scrub my project up with some soap and some water, and then I'm going to apply a patina. And here I have a black patina and a brush that I only use to apply patina. And your project needs to be clean and it needs to be dry because, you know, water's going to stop the action of that patina. So you want to make sure that you're working with a really clean and dry project. Also, whenever you're soldering or working with chemicals, you always want to wear safety glasses, and you should wear a mask too. Now, you can also wear gloves if you like when you're doing this. I am just holding the stone with my finger so it doesn't slide around while I apply it, and then I'll use my brush to flip it over and make sure that I have the patina all applied on the other side. Once I'm finished, I'm going to wash it and dry it, and then I'm going to hit it with some fine steel wool and remove some of the patina to bring out the silver beneath so we have a really nice antique finish. And here's our finished project. I love it. I'm going to simply thread a chain through the top, and that's a beautiful, unique, one-of-a-kind necklace. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. And once again, be sure to check out my brand new book called Soldering Iron Jewelry. I will put a link up above and one below in the description, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.